Fantastic. Well, we might get underway, everyone. So thanks, everyone, for coming back for week 2. We're really excited about this week. We're going to have a different host each week. And this week, our guest host is Jeff Roberts. We thought it'd be great to have a millennial on stage. And Jeff is like a deep dive theologian millennial, so it's like even better to have him on stage with us.
What's the year age for millennial?
I don't know, but you're at the top end.
All
but
right.
But
because I'm definitely pushing the...
You drink boutique coffee and all
I
that
do.
millennial type stuff, so it's awesome to have Jeff with us. And today we're just doing a session on justice. So we promised last week we'd talk a little bit more about justice. So that's going to be really great. Fabulous. All right. Well, Jeff, do you want to kick us off? And we'll
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the topic is forgiveness.
Yes.
There's a book.
There's a
Read the
book. Oh my goodness.
Love the book. Do we need to hold the book up?
We need to at least hold the book up once
Great.
for the camera, because
I would love to.
I promised Glenn we'd do that this week.
I've not seen the physical book itself. When I was told it was published, I immediately downloaded the Kindle version.
Yes.
I'm one of those hip millennials, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Okay, so there's a book. Fantastic.
Yes.
So what did you guys talk about last week then?
Good. That's a good question. So last week we set sort of the basics. Do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, so last week was the first of the 6 in the series that we're doing, and we kicked it off by talking about why. Why would we forgive? Why is this an important thing? Why is it a value for us? One of the things we covered is that forgiveness feels heavy. It's unpleasant to be carrying all of that around with us. It takes a lot of effort to maintain that and to keep that on our backs all the time. And unforgiveness, it can stop us from doing the things that we want to do and from being the people that we want to be. So I think within, the space of Christianity and in the church, people know that, but also outside of that space, those things are true as well. So,
Yeah, that's really good.
people are motivated to grapple with this issue.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. And then we talked about, sort of from the faith side of things, we talked a little bit about the fact that there's like a healing component to forgiveness that sort of is going on in us. And there's probably some of these other issues like justice, like what happens with all this. There's that sort of situation going on. And that we do this because Jesus examples this for us and models the kind of life we want to live into. So that's something that we definitely started talking about last week.
Yep, and we talked a little bit about what forgiveness isn't, because I think it is a misunderstood space sometimes. There are a lot of misconceptions about what it means if I have to forgive somebody. We talked about that it doesn't mean that I have to be a doormat, that everybody has, that gets to walk all over me, and that my needs, don't get met because I've forgiven them. It doesn't it doesn't mean that we need to reconcile with the person who has wronged us. And it's not saying that when we forgive a person, we're not saying that didn't matter, that thing that happened to you, that thing they did, it did matter, it was wrong. So it doesn't negate that to go through this process of forgiveness.
That's super good.
Okay, so that gives us a bit of a recap of last week. And so this week we're thinking more of that justice stuff.
Yeah. So we're unpacking a few things this week. So there's really 3 things that I wanted to talk about as sort of big themes for this week. One of them is justice, obviously, because we raised this last week of what do you do with all this? Like, someone's done something wrong to us and it feels super unjust to just forgive and then...
Completely.
Yeah, right? So we wanted to spend a little bit of time with that. One of the activities I wanted to lead us in today was actually around desire, in terms of, when it comes to forgiveness, so say you've wronged me and done something horrific to me, well, what actually do I want? Like, do I want you to die in a car wreck? Well, probably initially, but maybe I don't want that.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, but maybe that's an overreach. Like, maybe what I want is actually to be in good friendship, or maybe what I want is to feel affirmed, or maybe what I want is to know that I matter, or maybe what I want is to be respected, or there could be a lot of things I want.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about today. Well, what do you want? And we're going to do a little kind of workshop of our own of maybe some issue of forgiveness in our own life and talk a little bit about that. And then Kylie really wants to talk a bit today about grief and loss, because a component of forgiveness is obviously grief and loss, right? Like there can be things that are done to us that we can't undo. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So we've got a fair bit of stuff on, but we're going to do that really well.
Okay, so let's just start with, big question to start with. Someone hurts me,
Yes.
don't they deserve to be punished?
Yes.
What's
a
the
good question.
consequence? There's got to be justice.
The-
I demand justice.
Yeah, and we all demand justice, and I think that's an important conversation point for us to start with today. That does God want justice? And I think He does. I think He wants justice for us, but I think He also wants to free us from the burden of taking justice into our own hands, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to take justice into our own hands. I think of that scripture in Romans about, don't take revenge, like leave this to God. He has got this sort of covered. And I think today, when we talk about this issue of justice, I'd like to introduce everyone, and maybe you can help me a little bit with this too, Jeff, with this concept of shalom, this idea that God is making all things right, and that He's the right person to make all things right. And when we try and make all things right through exerting power or control or manipulation, we often end up in a worse place than we kind of started. So I guess just to start our discussion today, does God want justice for you? Yes, He does want justice for you, and He wants justice for your situation. But He has a long view, different perspective of that justice that will involve making all things new, including those people that have wronged us and the ones we have wronged in small and catastrophic ways. So do we want to talk any more about that? Well, when you think about shalom, I know this is a pretty heavy kind of concept, but like this is important, right? That God is setting things right in the world.
Yeah, I think, like, especially if you think in beatitude terms,
Yeah.
like it's just one after the other. It's basically saying these are things that are wrong, but they will be made right.
Yeah.
So, blessed are those who mourn.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's something wrong,
Yeah, definitely.
but it's going to be made right.
Yeah.
So there is a set of promises there about shalom, about peace, about justice even
justice
coming to pass.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the thing I wanted to remind us all of is that we are freed of the burden of doing that. If we try and take that into our own hands, that's only going to lead to really more mess in a situation. But it's important to name that God cares about justice, and that's an important part to think about. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, can I just add something to that too?
Yeah.
Just that He does have compassion for us in this situation as well, and what we are trusting in is His character.
Yeah.
If we put our trust in our own little tools that we have, it's a position of weakness, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I love what you said too last week, Kylie, from a clinical point of view, when you said when we try to take things into our control that are beyond our control, the result is always distress. Yeah, it's always distress. And I think this creates a lot of distress for us. We talked a little last week. Someone asked a question about the whole situation in the Ukraine. And they're like, I find it really hard to even contemplate what's happening there because there seems like there's no justice or whatever. And of course, that's a horrific situation. And we'll talk a little bit more about Lament later and how we deal with grief and loss and pain and all of those kind of things. But we have to know the fact that God is in the business of setting things right. But if we try and kind of do all that work ourselves, then we're just going to make a big mess. So, yeah.
So if we trust God
Yeah.
to be the one who brings about justice, and we set aside our kind of desire for vengeance,
Yes.
does that mean that I'm not allowed to ask for an apology?
Yeah, this is a good question.
Like, are there consequences, or does forgiveness just mean that they get let off the hook?
That's a great question.
yeah, really good question. And my answer to that is no, not necessarily at all. It doesn't mean that that precludes you from seeking an apology. It doesn't mean that you don't pursue compensation necessarily, or that you would seek for there to be some kind of consequences. And this is where I think psychology would talk a little bit about values. You might need to have a bit of a fight to bring an issue into the light. that doesn't necessarily preclude, well, it doesn't preclude
not at all.
forgiving that person. That's another process. And so really, our job, one of our jobs, is to say, what's important here? What am I about? What matters? What kind of person do I want to be in this situation? What kind of life do I want to have for myself? What values, do I need to look into driving my decision-making in this process? And sometimes that might be letting it go, dropping it. Sometimes that might be, no, I do actually need to have a battle around this. I do need to escalate it. Do you have anything to kind of add to that? Or
I just think this is something in our communities that we're forming, we really need to be, like, I mean, have you guys done work with this as well? Like just the idea of, like, some things just need to be, it's easy for us in faith communities in particular to kind of go, well, it's not a big deal, we'll just kind of, but then we kind of keep dealing with the same stuff again and again and again.
Yeah, like, you can just, there can be an attitude, especially in Christendom sometimes, that forgiveness is sweeping things under the carpet.
Yeah.
Like, you're just trying to not cause a fuss, not make it out like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Trying to just gloss over things. And that clearly doesn't work well in the end, because you end up with hurt and bitterness, and even like generationally, it continues to hurt people.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more today about boundaries, because this is where you've done a lot of work with your community around this. So I think we can leverage that and talk about that as well together, because,
Can I just add something around that values discussion that we were having there before? That sometimes we might, we have lots of values that we have, things that are important to us, things that we stand for, things that matter to us. But sometimes those values can be incompatible with each other. They don't sit nicely together. So you might have a value for compassion, say, and you might have a value for justice.
Yeah.
And at any one time, one of those values might be in the light and the other one might have to take a bit of a back seat. So it's not necessarily a tidy process, but it's still important, but also to be able to sit with that tension. An analogy that's used a lot in psychology is, can you imagine that there's, imagine the globe, okay? So right now in Australia, here we are, and it's daytime, so the sun is shining on us. But there are other countries on the other side of the world that are in darkness at the moment, so that's not their moment in the sun, so to speak. But eventually that globe will turn and shift. And it's the same with our values. We can't always be upholding all of them at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes one will be in the spotlight, another one might have to take a bit of a back seat. And that's just the messiness of life.
Yeah.
So not to put pressure on yourself, I suppose, but does that mean I'm a bad person or I'm a not compassionate person if I need to have a bit of a battle around this? Well, no, but this value is in the forefront at the moment, so that's okay. I can hold the tension, that this is still important to me as well, but not what's required in this specific moment. So.
Wow. That's super good. Like, when you say that, I feel like there are some tools that I will draw on more often than others. Like, I will more often maybe go to a compassion place than I will go to, like, let's drag this out into the light and go at it place. And I suspect, Jeff, you're probably more likely to drag things out into the light and have a look at it.
It depends if we're talking about things I've done wrong or things that someone else has done wrong.
So I think what you've named for me there is, maybe it might be good to lean into some of the sides that I don't often lean into, just to feel what they feel like.
Because they might feel uncomfortable, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. And I think that's a lie that we tell ourselves a lot of the time is, if it feels uncomfortable, then it's the wrong thing, or not God's will or something like that. But no.
No.
No, this is something we're just, I think, not very good at generally, is sitting with uncomfortable feelings, or, naming them as bad feelings or whatever. But that's how it should feel and does feel.
Yeah.
Doing hard new things sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong decision. That's emotional reasoning, and that's
I think in the church we're very guilty of that as well, though, because we say, because I feel something uncomfortable or awkward or something we were put into the bad feeling box,
Yeah.
we then say anything in that box is my discernment,
Yeah.
telling me that that's a
100%.
wrong
Yeah.
or a sinful or no, it's
Yeah.
just sometimes your feelings are giving you feedback from your values being violated or something
Yeah.
going on in your world.
Yeah.
Your feeling is not sinful or otherwise, it's just
Yeah.
feedback
Yeah.
that tells you that you need to do something.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
good.
That's right.
So good. Yeah, I think that's been really challenging already today.
Okay, so we've got the issue of forgiveness is what we're talking about, and we've
Yeah.
separated forgiveness from reconciliation, and we've even now separated out consequence or compensation even from that again. But what if someone does something that can't be fixed, that can't be taken back? So, you know, if I steal $10 from you, you can demand that I give you $10 back,
Yeah,
and in some
right.
respect, there is an equity in that transaction.
Sure.
But what happens if you have shamed me or hurt me in some way,
Yep.
and it can't be fixed like that? It's
Right.
not transactional like that.
Sure.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit last week, so that's a whole new thing, isn't it? I think we have this kind of linear reasoning that, that it's a simple transaction, and sometimes it might be, that, this person does the wrong thing and they say sorry and then they give it back or whatever it is and it all is right in the world. But sometimes, we talked about last week examples, perhaps that person who did that thing has passed away, or perhaps they're not interested in or
Yeah.
offering any kind of remorse or anything
Yeah.
like that. Does that mean you're stuck? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You can still go through this process of forgiving that person,
Mhm.
but there's probably going to be some grief around that and some sadness around that. It's not panning out how it should, or how
Yeah.
we feel like we need it to. And how can we ever be okay again if that can never be made back up?
Yeah, that's
That's kind of an acceptance issue, I suppose. And it does go back to what we talked about last week as well. If we keep trying to get that need met or that loss made up in our own ways with our own tools, and it's not possible, that's exhausting
Yeah,
and
it's
depleting.
despairing, yeah.
And despairing is a
Yeah.
good word. Yeah, right. So we need to find another way, but we know that God always makes a way, and there is a way, but the way might involve some sadness and some grief and some acceptance that I'm not getting it back. This is what, I've envisaged for it. This is what is right in my eyes.
yeah.
And it's not going to happen.
I mean, that can even hit. I was thinking about that when I saw your notes on this. That can even hit when we actually reconcile with someone, but the relationship's not the same. It's now a different kind of thing. So there's something that has been lost, that it's gone now. It's gone, and that I feel like I've never really been given many tools around that. So that's something that
Okay.
obviously you do a lot in therapy settings. So
Sure.
what
Okay.
are some things that you could say if people that
Yeah.
have gone through loss that,
Yeah.
that really can't be put right in terms of it can't be replaced?
Sure. Okay.
Like, what are some useful tools to?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you 4 steps today, which are useful steps in terms of facing grief and managing and navigating grief. So the first step is just to hold yourself kindly. So to just, in the distress of that, or the despair of that, everything that you are doing is in a context of self-compassion. For example, what would you say to a friend who was going through this? You would say, look, I'm so sorry, like this is really hard. Sometimes we find it harder to do that for ourselves than we do for other people, but that's a really important skill. Jesus is the ultimate model of compassion, so if we don't know how to do that, that's a great place to start, where we're looking. So just hold yourself with kindness and compassion, and just be gentle. That this is hard. It's going to be an up and down journey, and that's okay. The second one is a tool called dropping anchor, which is a grounding kind of a tool. When you think about anchors, and you can think about them either literally as they function, what's the job of an anchor? What does an anchor do? I'll ask you guys.
Well, it holds a boat where it is.
Yeah, okay.
It moors you, it stops you from moving.
Stops you
Yeah,
floating
yeah,
away.
That's right, yeah. So if there's a storm, the anchor doesn't take away the storm, but the anchor
Right.
steadies the boat in the storm.
Right.
So this strategy called drop anchor is a similar principle. And when you think about anchors in scriptures, they also function in much the same way. So,
Right.
you know, they steady us. So it's a helpful analogy, I think. So,
So in your case, the storm is an emotional storm that's happening to us right now when we think about this thing we've lost?
yeah,
or?
it's an emotional storm. It's a circumstantial storm, possibly.
Right.
It's a, you know, forgiveness issue, and, you know, there's ongoing conflict or something that's going on.
It's a like replaying it over in your head kind of storm?
Yeah,
All that
yeah.
kind of,
I
yep.
think the language you used is helpful here as well, because it's not just about someone has hurt me,
Yeah.
and so I'm hurt. It's also the language you're using is grief and loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes there's no one that you can pin the
Right.
crime on.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
just happens. There's
That's-
tragedy. It
yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yes.
You're right.
Um,
That's
Yeah.
good.
and this is an
absolutely,
interesting tool
yeah,
then for
yeah.
dealing with that, because
Yeah.
the sense of loss is the same.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's
yep.
good.
So this is a tool that can be used in any kind of a storm, emotional storm.
Got it.
So, yeah. Is that something that you would be willing to have a go with me right now, this drop anchor skill? You can do it right where you are, where you're sitting. So, as with everything, it's opt-in. You're invited. You don't have to. You can listen. You can watch if you would like to. If you would like to do something a bit experiential, I'm just going to take you through a really brief version of it now. But, you know, no expectation. You do what's the right thing for you today. Okay?
Great.
So, yeah, all right. So the first thing we're going to do is just get comfortable where we are, just in the chair there. Okay, you can close your eyes if you want to. You can just soften your gaze or fix it on a spot somewhere in the room if you would like to. And what I want you to do is just kind of notice what's going on for you at the moment. If you were to notice and name any particular feeling that may have showed up for you when we were having that conversation just then, what would that be? It might be some kind of anger or, you know, sadness or disappointment. So what we're going to do is just notice that. And if we had to put language to it, what would be a good word to fit? And when you've named that and you've noticed what that is, maybe just kind of put your focus on that. Maybe breathe into it. Open up to it. Just let it be there. Don't have to do anything with it. It's just you and this particular feeling. And then we're going to go to the next step, which is coming back into our body. So while we're still holding that feeling there, we're going to broaden our awareness a little bit to where are we right now? Use your senses to figure that out. So you might be able to hear some sounds in the room, hear traffic, feel your feet on the floor, your body in the chair. You might want to come back into your body a little bit, so wiggle your toes in your shoes, shrug your shoulders maybe a little bit, or roll your spine. Just take a few quick breaths. Okay, now we're just going to regroup and go, well, okay, why am I here? I'm here in a church building, listening to a talk about forgiveness. Implies that this is a value for you, this is something that's important to you. You're here to, to learn, or whatever your reasons are for being here today. Let's just regroup and put our attention back onto that. Come back into the room and just bring your awareness back to the talk. And that's a drop anchor. It's just a 3-step process. Will there be notes about this?
Oh,
just on
actually,
the website?
yeah.
'Cause I
So
should have had
if you would like
handout
to
or
get a
something.
copy of all this,
Yeah, yeah.
you can go to our website and you can sign up for our mailing list. And each week we send out the notes for the week.
Yep,
And we put them on our website on the Sorry Not Sorry page, so you can.
yep.
with
Where's
them.
your website?
So if you go to rhythms.org.au and you click on Sorry Not Sorry, then you
Do
can...
you have those little flyers with you?
Yeah, so on your table, there's probably those
Yeah.
Sorry Not Sorry flyers. If you scan the QR code on the back,
Yeah.
it takes you to that page.
So they're not just advertising this thing, they actually do have links and information and that sort of thing, which is all free, so, yeah.
And the videos from each session, if you want to come and catch them again.
But the 3 steps which I just did then were naming and noticing the feeling, coming back into your body, which is the breathing and maybe wiggling around and being aware of your own, a sense of your own body. And the last step was just regrouping. What am I doing again? What matters now? I can do that anyway. I don't need to wait for that feeling to resolve before I do that. So
Gotcha. So
yeah.
take this, land this in a Monday. So next Monday, it's Monday
Yep.
morning,
Yep,
and I'm sitting down to work,
yep,
and I'm starting to get stuck into something,
yep,
and I realize I have a recurring thought about
yep.
something
okay.
that I'm angry about, or
Yep,
something that I'm
okay.
frustrated about.
So I think what our tendency is to do is go, this again, just shove it down, stuff it down,
Yep.
get on with what we're doing. So almost going straight to the last step of
Yeah.
dropping anchor.
Got it.
If we could just take a half a minute, just to go, you know what, I'm angry. I'm
Yeah.
naming that, I'm
Yeah.
calling it out, I'm putting language to it, I'm angry.
Yeah.
I can tell that I'm angry because my chest is tight.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah,
Just
that's-
being present to
My
your own
fist
body.
is bald.
Yeah,
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 that's
that's right. So I'm calling that, I'm
Yeah.
naming it. It's anger. That's okay. That's just part of our, functioning as a human. That's
Yeah.
fine. So, and then I'm going to sort of ground myself a bit by using my senses, taking a couple of breaths, putting your feet on the floor, wiggling your toes, look out the window, what can I see, that sort of thing. And the last step is, right, I've done those things, now I can kind of get back into my work. I'm still angry, does that mean it didn't work? No, I can be angry and put my attention back onto doing what matters right
Yes,
now.
okay.
So, yeah.
That's
So,
excellent.
yeah,
Great.
cool.
Great.
Really helpful skill. So,
Super
very
helpful.
artificial always when we practice it in a situation like this. But, yeah, very useful in real life.
That
so.
little skill of, we name things to tame things, kind of like, I know you hate those cliche type things, but name things to tame things. Like, I love that stuff,
Yeah.
because if I can just name it, I name what it is, it's like half the power drains out of it just by naming the thing. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm super angry about
It's the
this.
same with my kids. You got to give them emotional language, because if they can express themselves, they don't need to chuck a tantrum, because they can actually talk out their feelings
Yeah.
instead of needing to act out their feelings.
Yeah.
So
And throwing stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great practical skill set to
Super
bring
practical.
to those feelings of grief or hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glenn, do you
Yeah.
have any other tools, contemplatives kind of stuff that you would bring
I
to
love all that
to
stuff. I so love all that stuff, and I think it would be great to. Now that you've done a little exercise, I think I would love to do a little exercise too with us, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But just to cue that up before we start, I think taking that idea of naming things to tame things, I guess, and maybe extrapolating a little bit to this forgiveness space, I think one of the things that we haven't done really well, Jesus spends a lot of time asking people, what do you want? And I don't think we often ask ourselves, what do you want? And so I think we need to, can we spend a little bit of a moment, and I'll do a little bit of an activity with this. Actually, I might do a little bit of activity later on once we've talked a bit more, but what is it that you really want? And when you sit with what you want, if you could think of now, well, let's do this activity now. Think of now some situation in your own life that you feel invited into forgiveness. Someone who has wronged you, someone who has done hurtful things to you, someone who has taken something from you, someone who has hurt you in small or catastrophic ways. Just maybe if you have the energy for it, let's just maybe think of that situation. And then have a think about, well, what is it that I want? If Jesus asks us, well, what do you want here? What do you want to happen here? And like we said, our first reaction might not be our best reaction. Well, what do I want? Maybe I want an apology. Maybe I want a relationship back that's been broken or damaged. Maybe I want, this wound inside me to be healed about this situation. Maybe I want to be free to love other people.
Or maybe you're more like a normal person and you really just want to smack someone in the head.
Yeah, maybe you just want to smack someone in the head. Okay, so let's imagine I want to smack someone in the head. So Jeff's wronged me in a moderate, not catastrophic way. And I feel like the best response to that wronging is to smack Jeff in the head. So let's sit with that for a minute. Okay, what do you want, Glenn? Glenn, I want to smack Jeff in the head.
I'm going to sit with that slightly further away. No.
So I smack Jeff in the head. Like, is that now like the end result of this is Jeff has now been smacked in the head.
Yeah.
But there's probably not really another result. It hasn't resolved the situation that I want. I think back to a situation of several years ago. I was in this horrific business situation, and what I wanted was the whole thing to collapse. And like, that's what I really wanted, because I felt I'd been really disrespected and I'd been really wronged. And then the whole thing collapsed. But it didn't help, because now the whole thing had collapsed, but I didn't really feel any better, because that actually wasn't what I really wanted.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is important for us to sit with, and perhaps we can do a little activity around this.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Sorry, just before we get into the activity around
Yeah.
the smack in the head thing, it
Yeah.
just reminded me of something that the evidence base around that kind of cathartic thing of, I smash plates or I hit people or that sort of thing is pretty dodgy.
Right.
Like, you do feel better in the moment, but it long term,
Doesn't help.
the benefit of, like that sort of concept of I just need to get my emotions out by doing something violent or whatever, there's actually not, even science says, dunno.
It doesn't really help.
Yeah.
It sounds like it might help.
Like, it obviously feels better in the moment, but beyond that moment, there's not really a lot backing it up that as a long-term strategy to be free of some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that God has other tools.
So when
I think that ties in, though, to what you're saying,
Yeah.
though, because
Yeah.
it doesn't get you what you want.
No.
Yeah.
So even if you have a deeply cathartic outburst of some sort, ultimately, though, it doesn't satisfy the need that you were hoping it to satisfy.
Yeah. And I think this is sometimes in our prayer life, this informs why our prayers aren't answered. Because we pray, God, destroy this business. I don't know if you heard that prayer and did destroy the business, but I mean, the business was destroyed, but I'm not sure it was his work. But it wouldn't have helped. And so I think sometimes our prayers around forgiveness, that either catastrophic things would happen for people or whatever, don't get answered, because that's not what we want. It's not the long play of justice, of getting things right and setting things right. So why don't we do, if you're feeling brave, are we brave enough to do a little activity around this? You feeling brave enough? Okay, let's do a little activity around this, because it feels kind of brave. Once again, like Kylie said, opt in. If this is too traumatic to think about even right now, you can just enjoy the room, take in some art, relax, but otherwise we'll start with this. So what I want us to do right now, Osborne's going to put up a little timer up on the big screen here, and we're going to spend 2 minutes just on our own and ask ourselves, in this area that I've been wronged, in some particular case where I've been wronged, what is it that I really want? Can we do that together? Okay, you can kick that off. Just have to click on it and it'll start. Thanks, Oz. And this is so you can trust me that it will be 2 minutes. Let's sit quietly together and think about this. What do we really want in this situation? Okay, it's a minute in. Let's imagine you got that. Just imagine you got that. Is that what you really want? Let's spend the next minute thinking about that. Whoa. Okay, so how is that for people? Did you get any clarity out of that process of sitting with what you want? No, that's fabulous. Okay, so the next step is if you don't know what you want, and this is important, right? Because I went through about 4 things then. I started with, I want them to be exposed for the sham that they are in wronging me in this manner. And I'm like, no, that wouldn't really help. I want them to say, I was really wrong when I treated you that way. And then I'm like, yeah, but that's not really it either. I'm still not sure that would be okay. I want to not feel the shame of being treated that way. That's getting there, but it's still not quite it. And then I'm like, I want to just feel confident expressing my views regardless of how people respond. I'm like, okay, now I'm getting somewhere that I feel like, you know what, once I enter into that place, I'm like, well, what they did was like, whatever. I can actually enter into forgiveness throughout that because I realize that they actually can't give me that. They can't give me confidence and strength moving into new situations and handling negative. They actually can't give me that. So I feel like I can actually release them from that thing now because, that's not really the deal anyway. So if you don't know what that thing is, that today is maybe your invitation for this week. Why don't you just sit with that question this week to say, what do I really want? Scripture says that God gives us the desires of our heart, and I believe that's not just like, I'll give you everything you want. I believe he plants desires in our heart for what he wants. So why don't you sit a bit this week and go, well, what is it that I really want in this situation where I've been wronged? I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I have a silly question.
Great,
I
yeah,
know
please.
Think of no silly questions.
No.
Does this assume that we're all starting from a place of there is someone that I'm holding unforgiveness towards, or?
Yeah, well,
What's the context?
Yeah, that is the context. So the context, given we're doing a series on forgiveness, the context is, I need to get to some place of forgiveness. What actually do I want from that particular situation?
Yeah.
What do I actually want to happen?
Yeah.
And sit with that for a bit before I get to what is the core of what I want. Because I think sometimes what we want are things beyond our control, like we said, and that those create this kind of D word that I've forgotten that I really don't like. What did you say? Distress. Yeah. They create distress in me. Yeah, gosh. Yes, super good. So I hope that was helpful. All right, let's, sorry I just jumped ahead a little bit. There's one more thing. I've already hogged the last section. Sorry, Kylie, I'll kick over to you in a sec. But I think one other tool around grief and loss that you talked about before, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this because it's a kind of, like churches, it's a helpful skill for churches, and that's this idea of lament. You spend a lot of time studying the Psalms, and a large percentage of the Psalms are lament.
Yeah, huge portion.
So that's a word that maybe we aren't all familiar with. So what is lament when we talk about lament?
I think lament, especially in the context of biblical lament, it's not just I feel sad. It's I feel sad, I feel angry, and it even encompasses those psalms that say, not only am I sad, am I angry, I also want God to be sad and angry at that person, and I want him to hurt them.
Yeah.
So it's the psalms of lament, or the Bible, the way that theologians talk about it, they say imprecatory, which even if you don't know what the word means, it sounds like it should. Imprecatory psalms. It's a grief, it's an anger, it's a distress, it's a I want you to hurt them, God, because they have hurt me, and I want justice. But it's a process in those psalms that often ends up in a handing over of that grief to God, to say you are responsible for vengeance and you are responsible for justice, and I just need to not carry that anymore.
Gee, that's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Can I jump in on that too? Sometimes homework I might give to people that I see, or I can give it to you right now, is to find a psalm. And it doesn't have to be a pretty psalm. It can be a psalm that you think hits the mark in terms of what's going on for you in that process, or how you're feeling towards that person.
So three I've written down here just in case that came up.
Okay.
Psalm 88 is about despair. Psalm 94 is about retribution, and Psalm 55 is about betrayal. So they're all in the notes, but they're like good ones to start with. Because I mean, I've often spoken with people and saying, you can pour this stuff out to God. You can tell him all this stuff.
Yes.
And they go, I can't. That's like too much. I couldn't say those things in his presence. And then I'm like, well, say this psalm, right? Because that's legit. It's in the Bible. He's not going to be offended.
Yeah.
You can absolutely pray that psalm.
It's incredibly validating because what it's showing us is that the people who came before us in their relationship with God, they were okay with literally cursing.
Yeah.
Like that's what imprecatory means. It's a psalm of cursing. So they were literally comfortable to stand before God and say, I am angry, I am furious, I am distraught, I am broken, I am hurt, and I hate everyone, and I hate you even, and it doesn't make any sense. And that is actually a valid and even biblical way to talk to God. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You're allowed to have those feelings.
Yeah.
I just find that incredibly empowering.
It's
like the book
super.
of Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
The author of Ecclesiastes just says, everything's meaningless.
Yeah.
And what he means is nothing makes sense.
Yeah. And that is the journey towards healing. To
Yes.
go through those dry places and those
Yeah.
dark places. And I think some of us who've been raised in faith communities have sort of said, nah, that's all like bad stuff. You can't name any of that. You can't say any of that. You can't, if you're in the community and you express that, you're now a high maintenance person or whatever. But we're here to say, no, we need to. Our path to healing is through these places.
And it wasn't just individual. The lament was something that communities did.
Yeah.
And we understand lament in a community when someone has passed away. And people will get together and they will both celebrate but also wail. So there is these extremes of emotion. But the same is true in those psalms. They can be deeply personal, but they can also be corporate. I know churches and pastors that get together and they lament together.
Whoa.
Because sometimes it's good to do that together, to be together in our grief, to be together in our anger or sadness or hurt, because there is something healing about sharing that with one another.
Gosh.
Yeah, and just two things that came to mind when you were talking then, Jeff, was that God is big enough and God is safe enough.
Yeah.
Great.
So, you really can't shock him.
Yeah.
He's, big and
Big
safe.
enough and safe
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
I love that. That is absolutely sensational. And I think, one of the questions that came up last week, I want to harp on it, was this whole Ukraine situation and what's going on there. And that is a classic case of lament. We can hold the pain of
That's
that
right.
situation in the presence of God, knowing that we ourselves can't resolve it, but we need to feel heard here about this. There's something very wrong happening. And yes.
That's right. And to that, I think Jesus, when he says, blessed are those who mourn,
Yeah. It's true.
like that, what a crap scenario, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But at least there's truth in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't say, no, we just magically fix everything.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
says, no, you're going to mourn.
Yeah, there's going to be things.
And so there's honesty in that.
Yeah, that's great. Man, pastors get together and lament?
Yeah.
Wow. Who'd come to a Wednesday night lament meeting? It'd be great. It'd be very healing. Maybe one day.
Well, people talk about prayer meetings and
Yeah, that's right.
that'd be a real different flavour.
Yeah, that would have a different flavour, that's for sure.
That's
Any other
right.
questions?
I have one more question.
Sure.
Can we have one more question? And then we'll open for questions. Okay.
Cool.
But one of the real reasons I wanted Jeff to come today is he's done a lot of work with boundaries. And you know how I said last week, boundaries is really something I want to grow in? Boundaries with people. For instance, we think of this verse, Jesus calls us to forgive 70 times 7, right? So, and we somehow take that, internalize that as people can trample all over me again and again and again.
Just let it hurt you over and over.
And I've just got to
Yeah.
let it happen. But of course, that's not loving or redemptive or any of the things
No,
that
it's
Jesus
awful.
is, right?
People read
it's
that
horrible.
passage and they're like, oh, so what you're saying is Jesus will hold me while you hit me.
No, yeah, right, okay. So
That's not what it's saying.
it's certainly not what Jesus is
No
saying,
way.
right? So I know, Jeff, you've done a lot of work with boundaries and helping people with boundaries. And I thought maybe you could give us some time in this last little time we've got, just some skills around how we would grow in our own boundaries with people. So we've gone through the naming of things. We've gone through the justice and giving that to God. We've gone through the healing process and grieving. But we also want to stop ongoing harm.
Yeah.
And this is where this comes in. So tell us Tell us some stuff about.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think that you can do forgiveness without boundaries.
Yeah.
I actually think that the two are deeply connected.
Got it.
But also, I don't like taking Bible verses hugely out of their context.
Yeah, sure.
So when I look at Matthew 18 and it says, oh, you should just keep forgiving, you should keep forgiving. If you read this, like the verses immediately before that, it says if someone sins, you should challenge them about it, and then you should take some friends and challenge them about it, and then you should tell your whole church, and then if they just keep doing that, if they keep hurting, they keep violating, they keep pushing boundaries, then you should distance them and not allow them to be in your inner circle. So then they say, oh, what about forgiveness? And Jesus is like, oh no, you've got to keep forgiving them,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean you have to keep putting up with them.
Yeah.
So therein lies the question of, well, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
so for me, the answer to that is it's got to be really practical.
Yes.
And so when I talk about boundaries, it's really simple. And the first part, I think, of an important boundary is just self-awareness. Because a lot
Right.
of us are just so concerned about how other people feel, and we take such a low view of ourselves that we don't think that we deserve better.
Yeah.
And this plays into that idea of forgiveness, because I think sometimes instead of forgiving people, we take on shame and we say we deserved what they did to us.
Right. Yeah.
So the first step, I think, of a good boundary is to say, actually, it's not okay for someone to do that. So I think there's a worksheet that people can get a hold
Yeah,
of.
okay. Yeah, we'll
from you
put
as
that in the
well.
notes.
So my first step, it just says, finish these kind of sentences. It's not okay for someone to. And if you can't think of anything to put at the end of that sentence, you really need to sit down with someone who loves you and is not hurting you and get them to help you to understand that you have deep value. You're a child of God, and that you deserve to be able to say, no, I have a boundary that says you shouldn't call me at 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
And that's just a boundary that I have.
Yeah.
It's not okay. I have a right to expect that people will speak to me and not use coarse language
Yeah.
when they're speaking to me.
Yeah.
I have a right to expect whatever that is, to protect my energy, to protect my time. I am allowed to feel this. So there's a self-awareness that comes first.
Yeah, I like
So
it.
once we establish, so let's say that my rule is, so my second step, first one is self-awareness. I deserve to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
The second one is to set a boundary and to begin to protect that.
Okay, so let me give you one. When people say critical things to you, and they might even be sort of friends, but every time they're around, they're always trashing you or saying you could do better or whatever, right?
Okay, so I think we have our set boundary.
Yep.
So first it is I need to establish my boundary with you.
Yeah. Okay.
So I need to say I actually feel very uncomfortable when you speak like that with me.
Oof.
And it's clear and it is direct.
Yes.
And maybe you're a less clear and less direct person, but I think that when we are being hurt by someone,
Yeah.
we actually do a service to our relationship to be clear. It
Whoa.
doesn't mean we're mean.
Oh no. So what's that little
We've got to be
template?
compassionate.
What did
so
you
I've
just
got
say?
here, I am not comfortable with.
Wow.
There's no ambiguity there. Or I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Right.
And just the awareness, goes back to that self-awareness, I'm allowed to say no. Some people think that to be a good Christian, it
Yeah.
means being agreeable.
Right.
But that's nonsense. You don't want to have to agree to everything.
No, that's for sure.
Because people ask things of you,
Yeah.
or expect things of you, or demand things or do things to you that you should well and truly say no to.
Yeah.
So I think we think no is a dirty word in the same way that we think that certain feelings are bad,
Yes.
feelings that we should label and get rid of.
Yes.
Instead of saying no, they're just giving me feedback.
Yeah. Right.
No is just giving someone good feedback,
Right. It's just
Not okay.
candid conversation.
straight up. So I identify I have something worth protecting.
I think I'm feeling nervous even just with that template, when you say that template. Because I can imagine myself saying to someone, like, I'm not comfortable when you keep speaking critically of me like that. Like, I feel nervous just role-playing that with you.
But that comes back to that idea of self-awareness.
Right, yeah.
And you can feel nervous and do it anyway if that's consistent
Exactly.
with your values.
Exactly.
That nervous feeling isn't necessarily a cue that I'm doing the wrong thing.
Right.
Great.
It's just what it feels like when you get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's not going to kill you, it's just an uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
So as long
Fabulous.
as it's consistent with your values, then keep going.
I feel like this is great therapy.
And
I'm getting
I don't know,
on
I
this
suspect
couch.
that you guys have heard this, but sometimes all you need is 30 seconds of courage.
Yes. Just to say that template.
Just 30 seconds just to get through it. And that's why when I have worked with people, especially people who are more timid or people who are having this conversation in a context where they feel less powerful, having a script, so helpful.
Yep, definitely.
Write out your script and be like, this is exactly what I need to say.
This is what I will say.
So my internal script is, I am valuable and deserve to be spoken to in a way that treats me with value.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't accept the way that you are speaking to me, and I feel uncomfortable with that.
Yep.
So we've established our boundary.
Yes, we have.
Self-awareness, set your boundary.
Yep.
Be prepared to say no.
Yep.
And then I've got to hold the line, though.
Hold
and that's where it
the
gets hard. I've got to not back down from that
Yes.
boundary.
Yes.
So I got to very politely stand my ground.
Yes.
Because when we allow people to ignore our boundaries, we teach them that it's okay and that that's acceptable.
Yeah.
So if someone keeps calling me at 11 o'clock and I say to them, I'm very uncomfortable with that, and I keep answering the phone,
Yeah, that's right.
then I'm teaching them, actually, it's okay to violate that boundary.
Yeah.
That boundary's not actually that important to me.
Yeah.
So it's like when, and this happens a lot with adults and children. A child will violate a boundary and the adult will say, oh, it doesn't matter. Especially if it's someone else's kid and they do something, you say, oh, it doesn't matter. No, it does matter.
Yeah.
The appropriate response is, thank you for recognizing that that's not okay, and I forgive you.
Yeah.
But never say it doesn't matter, because what you're really saying is, I don't matter.
Yeah.
My boundary doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and you could treat me like crap because I'm a piece of
I'm
crap.
going to take it.
How harsh is that?
That's
what
terrible.
you're saying. When you let someone
Well, it's not
violate your
true.
boundary,
None of that is true, yeah.
you're making a statement about yourself that isn't true. So it's bad enough that someone else would treat you with that disrespect.
Yeah.
Don't treat yourself with it.
Yeah, that's great.
So stand your ground. Don't invite people to violate that boundary.
Yep.
And I think most powerfully, know when to walk away.
Right.
Because there are some people who just can't respect your boundaries. And in order to protect yourself and to value yourself, sometimes you have to say, if you won't protect my boundary, I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate consequence that you're in control of, is that you can take yourself out of that situation.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
So just to be clear, that Matthew
18.
Yeah, around the 70 times 7.
Yeah.
That's saying all of what Jeff just said and forgive them anyway.
Yes.
And forgive them
To
anyway.
come back to that.
Okay.
Because we do want that healing and that freedom to be able to love and do all of those things, and that's going to require forgiveness
And we
to flow.
don't want the heaviness of unforgiveness.
And the heaviness,
Exactly.
that's the issue.
Yeah.
Because if we get justice, it might
Yeah.
even the scales, but if that's I give you a black eye, you give me a black eye, then that's, even scales doesn't fix my problem.
No.
I've still got to wear makeup now.
You still got
like
trauma,
it's not
yeah.
good.
And there's
Yeah.
trauma from that, yeah.
And so
for
the
sure.
same happened with vengeance.
Yeah.
Vengeance just means I take it back out on you. So either I can have a system that fixes it and justice
Yeah.
that doesn't even it up, or vengeance that doesn't fix it, or I can devalue myself,
Yep.
which just says I'm worthless and deserve it. So
That's
now
no
you
good.
haven't hurt me, I've hurt myself.
Yeah.
Or we forgive.
Yeah.
So
Gosh.
ultimately, I think forgiveness is the only thing that takes the weight. And it doesn't say it's okay or it's all right or it's acceptable. It just says I'm not carrying it around anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's so
I like
good.
it. Yeah.
So good. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff, and we're running out of time.
Can I have 5 more seconds?
Yes.
Finally.
See, this is my issue with boundaries, right? Right here. Right here. There it is. Like this is. It's,
My last
it's like-
step, don't let someone make you feel guilty about establishing boundaries.
Okay, right.
Because sometimes people will say to you, I like the old you. I'm like, yes, the old you, the old you, I was allowed to walk all over you. But the new you, don't get manipulated by someone who says you've changed.
Okay,
Your change is good.
we're going to open it up to questions now.
Great.